The house at 414 Blackwood Lane didn't look evil. It looked exhausted. It was a Victorian structure with peeling white paint that resembled shedding skin and windows that caught the sunset in a way that made the glass look like it was bleeding. When Elias moved in, he was a man seeking silence. A freelance architectural illustrator, he wanted a place where the only thing he had to listen to was the scratch of his charcoal on paper. The realtor, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes, mentioned the settling noises of a house built in 1892. Elias didn't mind. He liked the idea of a house with bones. But by the third night, the silence he craved began to curdle. It started with the hum. It wasn't a mechanical sound, like a refrigerator or an AC unit. It was rhythmic, low, and distinctly vocal. It sounded like a woman humming a lullaby through a throat filled with dry leaves. The first manifestation Elias was in the kitchen, brewing coffee at 2 a.m., when he heard it clearly for the first time. The sound drifted down from the third floor, the floor he hadn't yet furnished. He froze. The hair on his arm stood up. It wasn't just the sound, it was the temperature. The kitchen, usually a balmy 70 degrees Fahrenheit, plummeted. He could see his breath, a pale, ghostly plume in the dim light of the stove clock. He took a butcher knife, cliché, he thought, but comforting, and climbed the stairs. Each step groaned under his weight. When he reached the third floor, he found the door to the small room at the end of the hall, the one the previous owners had painted a deep, suffocating crimson, was standing wide open. He had closed the door. He was certain of it. Inside the Red Nursery, the air was thick. It felt like walking into water. In the center of the room sat a single object Elias hadn't noticed during the walkthrough, a small, wooden rocking horse. It wasn't moving, but as Elias stepped closer, he saw something that made his heart hammer against his ribs like a trapped bird. On the floor, in the thick dust, were small, barefoot prints. They started at the window and led directly to the rocking horse. Then, they simply stopped. The escalation over the next week, the haunting turned aggressive. The reflections, Elias would catch glimpses of himself in the hallway mirrors, but his reflection would be lagging. He would turn his head, and his reflection would stay staring forward for a split second longer, its mouth slowly stretching into a grin that was too wide for a human face. The taps, every night at 3:14 a.m., 3 distinct knocks would sound from inside his wardrobe. Not on the door. Inside the wood itself. The scent, the smell of lilies, the flower of funerals, began to permeate his bedding. No matter how many times he washed the sheets, the cloying, sweet rot remained. One evening, while sketching, Elias felt a cold pressure on his shoulder. It felt like a small, damp hand. He whirled around, knocking his charcoal tray to the floor. There was no one there, but written in the black dust on the floorboards were 3 words in jagged, childish handwriting: "Help her hide." Elias didn't sleep. He researched the house. He found that in 1924, a woman named Clara lived there with her daughter, Lily. Lily had disappeared. Clara was found weeks later in the Red Nursery, staring at the wall, humming a song. She claimed the tall man had taken Lily into the walls. Clara died in an asylum shortly after. The night of the revelation, the climax came on a Tuesday, during a torrential thunderstorm. The power flickered and died, plunging the Victorian into an ink-black void. Elias stood in the foyer with the flashlight. The humming was no longer a whisper, it was a scream. It vibrated in his teeth. He ran up to the 3rd floor, driven by a cocktail of terror and a bizarre need to end it. He burst into the Red Nursery. The rocking horse was now moving violently, the wood shrieking against the floor. The temperature was so low that ice crystals were forming on the crimson walls. "What do you want?" Elias roared. The humming stopped. The wardrobe in the corner, the one he had never been able to open, creaked. The heavy oak doors swung wide. Inside, there was no ghost. There was a figure. A tall, gaunt thing with elongated limbs and skin like wet parchment. It wasn't a spirit. It was physical. It had large, milky eyes and fingers that ended in needle-like points. It lunged. Elias scrambled back, falling through the doorway, his flashlight rolling across the floor. He watched in horror as the creature didn't follow him. Instead, it reached for a small, shimmering transparency in the air, the ghost of the little girl, Lily, who was huddled in the corner of the room. The ghost was crying. The tall man was trying to grab her. Elias realized with a jolt of pure, existential dread that he wasn't watching a haunting. He was watching a predation. The twist, the glass theory. As Elias watched the creature's claw pass through the shimmering girl, the reality of the situation shattered. He noticed something he hadn't before. When his flashlight beam hit the ghost of the girl, it didn't pass through her, it refracted. The girl wasn't a spirit. And the tall man wasn't a demon. Elias grabbed his flashlight and shone it directly at the wall behind the rocking horse. The light didn't hit the wood, it vanished into a pocket of distorted space. Here is why it wasn't what everyone thought. The house at 414 Blackwood Lane wasn't haunted by the dead. It was a geographic glitch. 1. The ghost of Lily. She wasn't a dead soul. She was the real Lily from 1924. Due to a rare atmospheric and electromagnetic anomaly centered on the Red Nursery, time had become thin. Lily wasn't haunting Elias, Elias was haunting Lily. To her, Elias was the blurry, terrifying phantom from the future. 2. The tall man. This wasn't a monster. It was a biological entity from a different dimension, a transdimensional scavenger that feeds on the energy released when two time periods overlap. It wasn't trying to kill a ghost, it was trying to pull a living child out of 1924 to consume her. 3. The hum. It wasn't a lullaby. It was the sound of the two time streams rubbing together, like the friction of two tectonic plates. The temperature drops were simply the laws of thermodynamics reacting to the heat sink of a literal hole in space-time. 4. The writing. When the girl wrote "Help her hide," she wasn't asking Elias for help. She was writing to her mother, Clara, in 1924, because she could see the tall man, the scavenger, stalking her through the rift. Elias wasn't living in a horror movie, he was living in a collision. He didn't call an exorcist. He called a physicist he knew from university. They didn't use holy water, they used high-frequency stabilizers. The haunting ended when they patched the rift. The girl vanished back to 1924, hopefully to safety, and the tall man was snapped back to whatever dark fold in the universe he crawled out of. The house is quiet now. Truly quiet. Elias still draws, but he never uses red charcoal. And he never, ever hums. Because he knows that sometimes, the thing under the bed isn't a memory of the dead, it's a neighbor from a dimension that hasn't learned how to knock. Subscribe for more interesting content.